Welcome to Cerebral Women in Paris Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. Years ago, after hearing an artist say art will save us, my intellectual curiosity was sparked, and I began a journey to understand exactly how. Through conversations with visual artists and the professionals who support them, I explore how art helps us see our history, our culture, our lives, and the experience of others in ways no other medium can. Capturing these voices is essential. They remind us of the power of art and the importance of noticing life's simple beauty. And now, here in Paris, a city that has long welcomed the daring, the dreamers, and the defiant, I continue these conversations where art breathes, questions, and reminds us that creation itself is an act of liberation. Welcome and enjoy Cerebral Women in Paris. This episode features Robert Garland. He is currently the Dance Theater of Harlem's artistic director. Robert was a member of the Dance Theater of Harlem Company, achieving the rank of principal dancer. After creating a work for the DTH School Ensemble, Arthur Mitchell invited Robert to create a work for the Dance Theater of Harlem Company and appointed him the organization's first resident choreographer. He was also director of the professional training program of the DTH School and the organization's webmaster. In addition to choreographing several ballets for DTH, Robert has also created works for New York City Ballet, Britain's Royal Ballet, Oakland Ballet, and many others. His commercial work has included music videos, commercials, and short films, including the children's television show Sesame Street, a Nike commercial featuring New York Yankee Derek Jeter, the NAACP Image Awards, a short film for designer Donna Karan, and the Charmin Cha-Cha for Proctor and Gamble. Robert holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the Juilliard School in New York City. Enjoy this episode of Cerebral Women in Paris featuring the Dance Theater of Harlem's artistic director, Robert Garland. Robert, welcome to Cerebral Women in Paris. I'm really looking forward to this interview because I'm stepping out of my restricted visual arts arena. So I'm looking forward to learn more about your work. So we should begin with, when did you recognize your interest in dance?
It's a very interesting story. My mother played piano and my father was an avid basketball player. So much so that he had actually professional aspiration. And so I do believe that the combination of the physical activity from my father and the musical talent of my mother combined to kind of put me in the space where once I found out about movement, it was kind of a natural thing. But those two outer influences definitely impact my choice.
And was there a performer or mentor predecessor that really impacted your style?
Not really. You know, I remember being in high school and learning. I had a beautiful, wonderful music teacher who, you have those teachers that kind of you bump into and they kind of open up a world to you that you didn't know existed before. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was classical music. And so once I found classical music, it was like not far behind where it was the classical ballet. My mother had a set of encyclopedias, as most American homes did at the time. And so I looked up classical music, and then I found this other world that taught me about the 5 basic positions in ballet, and I was hooked.
I love that. So what you learned at the Juilliard School in New York City, has that impacted the work you create today?
It absolutely has. I was a musician or a music student in Philadelphia. And so I began dancing when I got to Juilliard. Ostensibly, I always tell people that Juilliard is a music school where some people dance and some people act, so music rules the roost there. And so I was very lucky and fortunate in the fact that I came up with a very strong music background. And so therefore, I did take advanced theory there when I was a dance major. Being a dance major there was an amazing thing. I learned an awful lot. One of my classmates was Wynton Marsalis, who taught me all about something I did not know, which was jazz, even though I should have known about it, but I didn't at that time. So yeah, it was very impactful being in that environment, particularly at that time. We're talking like the late 70s, early 80s, where, the world had just gone through that civil rights movement for African-American children. And so we were basically given an open door, to go in and study. So it was wonderful.
So as a choreographer, what inspires your choice of music for performance?
There was a moment where I was resident choreographer at Dance Theater of Harlem, meaning that and I was the first, actually. Arthur Mitchell appointed me resident choreographer, going in, creating work for his company that a resident choreographer more or less knows the dancers quite intimately. And so my choices in that role were mostly based on what I was feeling at the time, whether it was popular music or classical music, combined with what was in the room, my materials in the room. You're a visual arts person, much like you have your brushes and your canvas and your colors. That same thing exists in the dance space. And so I kind of tailor it to what is in the room at the moment. And now that I am artistic director, it has sort of shifted my ideas about music and putting together, because now I'm responsible for putting together programming, which is a different animal. I always tell people, as resident choreographer, I was sort of the babysitter, and I would go in, do what I need to do and left. But as an artistic director, I'm now the father, I'm the parent, and so I am definitely in charge of creating this landscape of music that is not only dependent upon what I'm feeling in the moment, but also how it bumps up against the other works from the program. So all of that impacts my choices. I try to always put together in my program something from the balancing or classical music space, and then I always try to have something from the African-American space, be it musically and or the physical vernacular dance itself, and then something a little more contemporary. So those are how I arrive at some of my choices.
What's the process of deciding on a color that works well with the theme you have in mind?
It is a cottage industry to theater, so there are many different kind of cooks. As a choreographer, of course, I come up with the musical choices and also the physical content and the steps, per se, that would go into the work. But I'm also responsible for choosing a lighting designer and a costume designer. So I sit down with these people and let them know what exactly my intention is with the work. And then they come back with whatever they are feeling and seeing from a theatrical perspective. Sometimes it's really in alignment with what I was thinking. And sometimes they'll come back with something completely different. That's a fabulous idea. I did a ballet that was dedicated to Arthur Mitchell and John Carlos. John Carlos was the gentleman during the Olympics in the late 60s with the Black Power fist after winning a gold medal during the civil rights movement. And so for that ballet, I went with a more sporty motif. That's sort of how things are put together. And the lighting designer and the costume designer work in tandem with one another. I've had the pleasure of having two Black women work with me on many ballets, the lighting designer Roma Flowers and my costume designer Pamela Allen Cummings. And so they've developed a shorthand with their choices for some of my ballets.
Interesting. And how do you keep learning?
How do I keep learning? Staying on top of trends that are happening within my dancer group. Dance is, of course, like any athlete, a very short-lived art form. So it's full of young people that are always living in this constantly changing environment. And with the advent of the internet and social media, It's added a layer of interaction with the public that I try to stay on top of, because if I don't understand where their heads are, then I won't be able to create on them any longer. That is how I renew myself, always through my lovely group of dancers.
Your career has been quite interesting. You've been very successful. I'm just curious, do you miss performing?
You know, that's a really interesting question. And I spoke to one of my dancers, Kyra, yesterday about this because, of course, when you're young, you want to dance. And so in order to facilitate that desire, you have to go to train, you join a dance company, you may become a member of a dance union, like all these other little things that come with the profession. But for me, after a period of time, I just got tired of traveling all the time. And I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And it was at a time when we were traveling quite a bit in the 90s with Dancing of Harlem. So I always tell people that my initial love was actually moving to music. You know, the bus calls, the warming up 5 times a day, the going to physical therapists, all of that stuff was like, oh my God, that's the hard part, you know. And so you have to be willing to do that part of it. But as fate would have it, now that I sit in the artistic director's seat, I do what now? Travel quite a bit. But I'm doing it much better now than I did it before. So we'll be in Paris pretty soon, and hopefully I'll get to meet you there.
Okay, yes, I look forward to meeting you. Let's talk about Paris. Share with my listeners that entire journey and process in preparing the team to come to Paris.
Yes, there are a couple things happening. Of course, we have this wonderful tour of France, which is the piece de resistance, if I may, of the tour, is definitely a stop in Paris. And the reason for that is that we have put together our ballet, The Firebird. The Firebird was a staple for Dancing of Harlem, one of its first big hits. We will be mounting The Firebird in Paris. The reason that is significant is because The Firebird originally was performed in 1910 to the music of Igor Stravinsky by a company called the Ballet Russe. It's a Russian fairy tale about a young prince that's wandering through a garden, and he comes across a mystical creature who gives him a feather of protection. And so he eventually gets in trouble, finds an evil sorcerer in the forest, and of course a romantic interest, a young, beautiful princess, and needs to call the Firebird to his aid, and she vanquishes the evil monsters and the sorceress. That premiered in 1910. It was a great hit at that time, and it was a great hit for New York City Ballet as well, where the founder of Dancing of Harlem, Martha Mitchell, danced. We have remounted our version of that with incredible designs by the amazing Jeffrey Holder. Jeffrey Holder was a Renaissance man of Caribbean descent. He did everything. He acted, he danced, he choreographed. He did absolutely everything. And so it's his designs that I think are the star of our Firebird. The choreography is beautiful. The dancers are lovely. But Jeffrey Holder's designs are wonderful because he has reset the entire ballet in the Caribbean. He took it out of Russia and put it in the Caribbean. And the reason for me that is significant is because it was a very long time ago, in the early 80s, that he was doing this, way before the term Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is a term that a lot of people now, mostly young, hip people in Brooklyn, use. My favorite definition of it comes from Walter Mosley, the novelist. Walter Mosley says that Afrofuturism is empowerment through speculative fiction. I told my dancers, essentially, Mr. Holder created kind of a Wakanda. That's how they would understand Afrofuturism.
I love that.
Wakanda has that same idea to it. Empowerment through speculative fiction.
That's wonderful. Oh my God. Yeah. I can't imagine how exhilarating that must be to create and work on a performance like that.
Yes. And Phyllis, it's really funny. I joined the company, and by the time I joined the company, Firebird was a bona fide hit. Everyone wanted to book it and see it. By the time the costumes got to my generation, we were like, well, it's a great ballet, but man, these costumes have been through the ringer. Cut to now, 20 years later, since its last performance, we have rebuilt all of the costumes and all of the backdrops. It is stunning. It is absolutely remarkable what Mr. Holder has done. We stay true to his original designs, and in the most amazing way, they are as valid and beautiful today as they were when they originally premiered.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So share with us, what do you enjoy most about your work?
Wow. What do I enjoy most about my work? You know, I work with dancers that are predominantly dancers of color at Dance of Harlem. And that's actually why Arthur Mitchell created this space. We center dancers of color, but we are open to everyone. So a lot of the dancers have come from predominantly white institutions that still have some reservations about Black people in the classical ballet space. And so one of the beauties of my job that I have now is reminding them that they are as worthy of occupying this classical space as anyone else. And watching them take that information, grow, and quite honestly heal from it.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you've created work for the New York City Ballet, the Royal Ballet, and the Oakland Ballet.
Yeah.
I'm really curious from an intellectual perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a new environment, different audience. How does that impact the thought process of creating a work in a different venue?
You know, that's a great question, Phyllis, and you are the first person to ever ask it. You know, I am very much first of all, I am very much a studied person. My love of ballet as a physical form runs hand in hand with my love of the history of the form as well. It is one of the reasons I believe that Arthur Mitchell, there was a moment that he kind of sort of took me under his wing and sort of dragged me to things that were non-dance related, actually, board of directors meetings, funder meetings, like letting me see the process, you know. So I got a chance to see from his perspective some of the challenges that he had. As a Black man, I got to observe as well in those environments. So oftentimes, I think that when I go to these other spaces, these predominantly white ballet spaces, to either create or teach, most of it from their side, I think, is just seeing someone that has my level of expertise, but in the body that I have. And so as a result, I think that it becomes a kind of a beautiful learning experience for all. Interestingly enough, for Dance of Harlem, I've created a number of popular ballets. I've created work to James Brown, Aretha Franklin. Also, I have a Stevie Wonder ballet. In fact, I'm the only one that Stevie Wonder has ever allowed to use that much music of his, which I'm proud to say. But when I go to those other spaces, I tend to lean into my knowledge of classicism, classical music particularly, because it's important that I represent, I believe, in those spaces, which oftentimes will have on their staff and maybe some in their dance artists, people of color, Black dancers, Black staffers, that heretofore may have never seen anyone like me. That may sound strange, but it's true. So all those things I take into consideration when I go and create work in other spaces.
Mm-hmm. Robert, when I interview visual artists, I'll ask them, when do they know a painting is done? When is it finished?
Mm-hmm.
Does that question pertain to the work you do also?
You know, it does. There is, for the musical side, always a beginning and an end. You always have that as your kind of arbitrary markers of where you're going. Within those arbitrary markers is a journey from the beginning of the ballet all the way to its end. And so you do have an idea when you are at your end, when all of the elements of what you've done prior to building the movement vocabulary, there is something that kind of ends up becoming like a denouement at the end, where everything comes together in a kind of a seamless, theatrical, physical, satisfactory culmination. And connecting with the dancers and their idea of getting to that moment kind of becomes a bit of a sacred space. Whenever you get to, I just realize this, Phyllis, whenever any choreographer gets to the end of a ballet and it's done, there's always applause that happens in the room. And it's kind of the artist acknowledging the fact that not only is it finished from a technical and a constructive space, but it's also finished from a spiritual and emotional space as well.
I can imagine that. All the dancers exhausted.
Yes.
Excited.
Yeah.
And like, this is it.
Phyllis, I have to say, you've asked me a really interesting question that no one else has ever asked. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious, believe me. Okay. So if you had not become a dancer, choreographer, and artistic director, what other career path do you think you would have chosen?
I've always been fascinated with psychology and psychiatry, how the mind works and functions. Actually, I got into New York University as a psychology major. At the same time, I got into Juilliard as a dance major. And I remember I was in Philadelphia and there were two camps. There was a camp that was like, you'll always dance, go get your psychology degree. It was like, no, do it now because it's a short career. And I chose dance, but I think I would have been in some type of mental health kind of space because, I don't know, I just always felt an affinity for Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud. I've read their books. That's always been fascinating to me.
So you're a really deep thinker.
I think I am. Yeah. I wouldn't go by that.
And I'm sure when you're creating, I can imagine how the brain waves are flowing.
I think, yes. I think they do come together in very interesting ways. You know, Arthur Mitchell was history. His counterparts were like James Baldwin, who had a huge crush on Arthur Mitchell, if I may give you a little tea there. James Baldwin, Cicely Tyson. I think that I am the first generation for this current young group of dancers that kind of had those initial intellectuals that formed and shaped me as a Black person. I would not have gotten through Juilliard without Mr. Baldwin's writings, you know, and then not long after that, subsequently, the Black public intellectuals, Michael Eric Dyson, Cornel West, Bell Hooks, all of them inform my work, both from an artistic standpoint and also my work with my dancers as well. And so it does help in how I work with my group on a daily basis. It's interesting, even though, as I said, Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, Bell Hooks, maybe people that I know, a lot of my dancers, even though they're dancers of color and have been to college and have degrees, have never heard of them. And so I see it as my responsibility to enlighten them in that regard as well. And I try to surround myself with a coterie of current intellectuals. Like, for instance, my friend Imani Perry, who's a brilliant writer, brilliant professor. I once did a beautiful video shoot to some of her work. So I try to keep that around my dancers because I think it's very important, because Arthur Mitchell did it for us. We always had someone in the room that was his contemporary that was brilliant, whether it was Cicely Tyson, Sidney Poitier, or Diane Carroll. They were all his people. In fact, and Ben Vereen, you know, I just found a video of Ben Vereen and Arthur Mitchell and Gregory Hines dancing together in a gala from the 80s for Dance Theater of Harlem, which is a beautiful kind of representation of what I'm talking about. I went on there.
No, I appreciate that, believe me. So you also create music videos, commercials, short films. That's an interesting combination.
Yeah, you know, way back in the late 80s, one of my side hustles was getting casted for the newly burgeoning forms of music videos, which at that time were run by the major Hollywood houses. So a music video shoot was like a movie shoot. You know, they aren't nowadays, but they were in those days. You got paid very well. And so that sparked an interest in the commercial world for me. And so I've always kept a foothold in that community. I've done many different commercials. One of my favorites was Proctor and Gamble. Charmin is one of their, major products. And they had invested in really fancy porta potties for state fairs across the nation. But they discovered that the porta potties, of course, would get long lines and people needed things to do. And so I created something called the Charmin Cha-Cha. So there was a moment in the 90s where above the porta potties, they had these televisions, and they would do like this cha-cha dance that people would participate in while they were waiting for the Proctor and Gamble porta potty. So yes, I created the Charmin Cha-Cha.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I wonder how many of my listeners will remember that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cute. So within the Black performance space, do you feel Black ballet has its own box?
I think the Black community, has always been a bridge builder. And so when Arthur Mitchell fashioned Dancing of Harlem, of course he had his, pedigree of dancing with New York City Ballet, George Balanchine, who was its founder and choreographer. He worked with and had works created for him. In fact, George Balanchine was one of our initial board members for Dancing of Harlem. It's the only board that George Balanchine sat on was for Dancing of Harlem. And our incorporation papers have his name. With that said, Arthur Mitchell knew that he was also building a bridge to other spaces. And so the popular music space with Dancing of Harlem was a kind of a new phenomenon when the organization was founded. And so in coming to see the company, you could very well, as I've already said, see something to Stevie Wonder and then see something that's to a completely classical composer like Donizetti or Stravinsky. And so all those things lend itself to something I think that is very unique to the Black community, and that's bridge building. I'm a member of Abyssinian Baptist Church, and there was a great German theologian that studied in America. And one of the things that he did was he studied the Abyssinian Baptist Church, and he studied it so well, he decided to take the tenets of the Black church back to Nazi Germany and present the ideas that was presented to him in the Black church there. I forget his name. But my point is that our spaces have always been bridge building spaces, whether it was the civil rights movement, the Black church, or Dancing of Harlem.
Thank you. I love that. When I see a performance, when I watch a performance, I see these bodies moving, right? And I sometimes, you sort of lift up in your seat. Sometimes your body, maybe if you were previously an athlete or something, but your body responds to the dancers. Do you ever notice that?
Absolutely. And, and if I may tie it to your visual art world, the theater was founded, the proscenium stage is based on painting. So, and I teach this in my composition class to get my dancers to under choreography composition classes, to get my dancers to understand what they're working within. They are quite frankly working within a canvas. It happens to have 4 sides to it, but it is indeed a canvas. And so when you are creating work as a choreographer or as a performer presenting work, you have to understand some of the tenets that go along with visual artwork, whether something is flat, like from the Renaissance period, or something that has depth. Like I always use, is it Andrew Wide's Christina's World? I think it's the one where the woman is in the meadow and she's looking at the house far off. To get my dancers to understand that some of the tenets of how you work inside of the theater box is exactly the same as a visual art. Oh, I use The Birth of Venus as another example. I forget that artist, but there is a very strong connection to that. I think that part of when you're in the theater is that idea that you're watching a moving canvas. And so people are responding to that moving canvas.
Yeah. My mind reminds my body it needs to work out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally.
You know?
Yeah. And that's why I encourage my dancers to go see art museums. And, one of my favorites, Kara Walker. I love Kara Walker. Even though she's a little challenging for some because of some of her subject matter, but I think just as a artist, she's just brilliant. And the Studio Museum just opened back up.
Oh, yes.
Which we are very excited about. But there were two things that I was praying that they would keep, and they did. In fact, I asked my executive director for Thelma's number because I had to call Thelma and thank her. There was a Me We that was done by Glenn Ligon. There was his Me We there. And, the story with that was, I'm sure about Muhammad Ali was interviewed once. And they said, come on, champ, you love to rhyme. You like to give us those raps, actually, they were referred to. He was like, do you have a rhyme for us? And he said, I do. He said, and it's Me We. And it stands as the shortest poem in the English language. And so when you walk down 125th Street, you always saw the Me We Ligon sculpture in the window. And so she put it back. And I was like, yes, Thelma. Yes. So that was number one. And then number two, the African American flag, the red, black, and green flag by David, what's his name?
Hammond.
Yes. That is back hanging again outside the newly reopened City Museum. I was like, Thelma, thank you for those two things.
Yeah.
I really am so grateful for that. Because for me, as a semi-visual artist, I like being reminded that we're moving all in the same direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've learned quite a bit. So this will be our last question. You've answered it in some ways, but this is the direct question. How do you want your work, your creations, to impact the way people think?
I want people to understand that binary thinking will always catch you up. The idea that nothing is ever black or white or yes or no, but there are many gradations in between that. And so through art, I think we have an opportunity to help people to understand those subtleties and nuance of the human existence. It's much more subtle and much more nuanced than I think a lot of us in our day-to-day work give it credit for. And so with my art, with anyone's art, I always seek to find other things that I had not considered, other things that I had not considered or thought of or dreamed of, that someone else has thought of and dreamed, thereby giving you a dream as well.
That's the perfect ending to a fabulous conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll see you in Paris.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're in Paris in February, correct?
Yes, that's right, in February.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. That was wonderful.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.